On the morning of April 23rd, 1987, a stillness fell over the rugged cliffs of Southern California that felt heavy, permanent, and hauntingly quiet. High on a sandstone ledge, a team of biologists gathered around a nylon net cage, their hands trembling against the desert chill. Inside was an extraordinary creature, a California condor, catalogued simply as AC9. He was a magnificent giant with a 9.5-foot wingspan, eyes like polished obsidian, and a ruff of black feathers that rustled in the wind. A C9 was not just any bird. He was the last wild California condor on Earth. When the net dropped and the handlers secured him, the sky above the American West became entirely empty of its ancient masters. For the first time in millennia, an apex scavenger had been wiped clean from the wild. Decades passed in silence. The grand thermals of the canyons went unridden, and the bones of the land lay forgotten. Fast forward exactly 34 years to a crisp autumn morning. A military-grade transport vehicle climbed a winding, unpaved road into a remote mountain range, where the wind howled through ancient pines. Inside were 25 specially designed transport crates, each holding a captive-bred condor. The plan was audaciously simple, but terrifyingly risky. Release all 25 giants simultaneously into a vast sky that had not seen a single shadow of their kind for nearly 3 generations. The odds were astronomically low. Skeptics argued that these birds, raised by humans using hand puppets, would plummet from the cliffs, starve in the wilderness, or succumb instantly to the invisible poisons left behind by civilization. Many predicted a public, catastrophic failure within 48 hours. But that is not what happened. Nobody expected what came next. When those 25 wooden doors slid open, it did not trigger a desperate struggle for survival or a slow, agonizing defeat. Instead, it ignited an ecological explosion that completely rewrote our understanding of avian intelligence and natural resilience. What these 25 birds accomplished in the months that followed stunned the global scientific community, leaving hardened field biologists weeping openly on the cliffs. This is the story of how an evolutionary relic defied its own death sentence. First, we will uncover how this magnificent titan was pushed to the absolute brink of extinction by human hands. Then, we will explore the agonizing, highly controversial decision to capture every single remaining wild bird, a high-stakes gamble that almost tore the conservation community apart. And finally, we will witness the mind-bending phenomenon that occurred when they were returned to the wild, a twist that nobody saw coming, which proved that nature possesses secrets we are only just beginning to comprehend. If you think this is just another standard story of an endangered species making a modest comeback, prepare to be completely mistaken. You need to look closer. To truly understand what was lost, you have to look at the California condor not as a mere bird, but as a living monument of deep time. It is not just a scavenger, it is a time traveler. This creature shared the landscape with woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant ground sloths. While those Ice Age beasts crumbled into fossil history, the condor sailed through the millennia unchanged, a masterclass in evolutionary engineering. Weighing up to 25 pounds, it is the largest flying land bird in North America. Its wings are not just tools for flight, they are highly sophisticated aerodynamic sails. A condor can soar up to speeds of 55 miles per hour and reach altitudes of 15,000 feet, high enough to share the airspace with commercial jetliners. They possess an uncanny, almost supernatural ability to read the atmosphere. By capturing thermal updrafts, a condor can travel more than 150 miles in a single afternoon without flapping its wings even once. It is an effortless, silent cruise that allows them to scan vast landscapes with vision that can spot a dead deer from miles away. But their grandeur goes far deeper than mere size. It is not just a cleanup crew, it is an environmental architect. In the wild, large carcasses present a massive biological hazard. If left to rot, a dead elk or deer becomes a breeding ground for lethal bacteria, anthrax, and toxic pathogens that can seep into the soil and poison local water tables. Smaller scavengers like coyotes, foxes, and crows cannot tear through the tough hides of large mammals quickly enough to prevent this bacterial bloom. Enter the condor. With a remarkably powerful razor-sharp beak and an immune system that possesses an almost miraculous resistance to deadly toxins, the condor can dismantle a large carcass in a matter of hours. They sterilize the landscape. By consuming the decaying matter and digesting it through a stomach acid that is more corrosive than battery acid, they neutralize deadly pathogens entirely, effectively halting outbreaks of disease before they can even begin. Furthermore, their anatomy is full of fascinating hidden quirks that reveal their deep connection to the environment. Consider their bare, featherless heads. For decades, people thought this was merely an aesthetic trait to keep them clean while feeding. However, thermal imaging has revealed that their skin color changes dynamically based on their emotional state and surroundings, flashing from deep pink to bright yellow and intense orange. It is a complex visual language, a silent code used to establish dominance and communicate across the flock without ever making a sound. They are incredibly long-lived, capable of surviving for over 60 years in the wild, and they form deeply devoted monogamous pairs that mate for life. They share parenting duties equally, taking turns incubating a single pale green egg for 2 full months. They are highly social, deeply intelligent, and fiercely loyal to their families. Yet it was this very complexity, this slow and deliberate pace of life, that made them incredibly vulnerable when the modern world came crashing down upon them. The collapse of the California condor was swift, brutal, and entirely man-made. As European settlers surged westward during the 19th and 20th centuries, they brought with them a wave of environmental destruction that the ancient birds were completely unprepared to handle. It began with rampant, unregulated shooting. Settlers, fueled by ignorance and fear, viewed these massive birds as monstrous predators that would carry away livestock or even small children. Thousands of condors were shot out of the sky for sport or collected for their feathers and eggs. Then came the destruction of their habitat. The old-growth forests where they nested were logged, and the vast, open grasslands where they foraged were carved up into bustling cities and sprawling highways. But the final, catastrophic blow came from a much more insidious, invisible killer. It was a massive human mistake that turned the condor's greatest evolutionary strength into their ultimate curse. Because condors are obligate scavengers, they rely entirely on the remains of animals left behind on the landscape. As hunting became a popular pastime across the American West, hunters left behind internal organs and remains of deer and elk. Almost all of this ammunition was made of lead. When a lead bullet impacts an animal, it does not stay intact. It shatters into hundreds of microscopic toxic fragments that scatter throughout the flesh. To a condor, a hunter's gut pile was an easy, welcoming feast. But even a fragment of lead the size of a single grain of sand is enough to paralyze a condor's digestive tract. The lead leaches into their bloodstream, causing a slow, excruciatingly painful death by starvation. The cascade effect on the ecosystem was immediate and disastrous. With the condors rapidly vanishing from the skies, large carcasses lay rotting on the landscape for weeks. The population of mammalian scavengers, particularly coyotes and feral dogs, exploded. Unlike condors, these mammals carried and spread diseases like rabies and tularemia, creating dangerous vectors that began infecting local wildlife populations and livestock. The very chemistry of the soil around these rotting sites shifted, suppressing the growth of native vegetation and allowing invasive weeds to take over. By the mid-1980s, the situation had degenerated into an absolute crisis. The wild population had plummeted to a heartbreaking total of just 22 individuals. The species was staring directly into the abyss of total extinction. It seemed utterly, completely hopeless. Then came the turning point, a moment born out of absolute desperation and fierce scientific debate. In 1986, a radical, highly controversial plan was proposed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the San Diego Wild Animal Park. They suggested capturing every single remaining wild condor on Earth to initiate an aggressive, experimental captive breeding program. The plan met with furious resistance. Renowned environmentalists and organizations argued passionately against it, claiming that a condor in a cage was no longer a condor at all. They argued it was better to let the species die with dignity in the wild, rather than turn them into zoo exhibits. The debate was bitter, emotional, and highly publicized. But with the birds dying from lead poisoning at an alarming rate, scientists knew that doing nothing meant certain death. The capture operation felt like a high-stakes, covert military mission. Biologists spent grueling weeks hidden in cramped, sweltering blinds on remote cliff tops, waiting for the final survivors to land near non-toxic bait. When AC9, the very last wild male, was finally captured in April of 1987, the total global population of California condors stood at just 27 individuals in captivity. Every single gene, every spark of hope for the entire species rested inside the walls of just 2 breeding facilities. The logistics of the breeding program were incredibly intense. Because condors only lay 1 egg every 2 years, scientists had to use creative trickery. They discovered that if they carefully removed the first egg from the nest, the condor pair would double clutch and lay a second egg. To ensure the chicks did not imprint on humans, which would ruin their chances of ever returning to the wild, biologists wore realistic, hand-painted condor puppets made of leather and feathers. For decades, humans lived a double life, speaking only in whispers, handling chicks with puppets, and dreaming of the day they could return these giants to their rightful home. That brings us back to that monumental autumn morning, when 25 of these captive-bred giants were transported to a remote release site. The cages were set up on a high, rocky platform overlooking a vast canyon. The atmosphere was thick with tension. The doors were unlocked via remote cables. For a few agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The birds sat frozen, staring out at an immense open horizon they had only ever seen through wire mesh. Then, one bold individual stepped forward. It spread its massive wings, felt the rush of the mountain wind against its feathers, and leaped into the void. The remaining 24 followed in a spectacular, chaotic rush of black wings. The initial comeback was a breathtaking triumph. Within days, the instinct of the ancestors seemed to wake up inside these captive-bred birds. They immediately found the thermal updrafts, riding the invisible elevators of hot air to heights that humans could only marvel at. They began exploring their historical territory, mapping out the canyons and valleys with astonishing speed. The threats, of course, were very real, but they were never the headline. The real headline was how the ecosystem responded to their dramatic return. Almost immediately, the landscape began to heal. Carcasses that had previously sat rotting for weeks were discovered by the condors within hours. The cleanup was efficient and total. Field biologists monitoring the release sites noticed a profound shift in the local ecosystem. The overpopulated coyote numbers began to stabilize as they were pushed away from carcasses by the intimidating presence of the giant birds. The water quality in nearby mountain streams improved noticeably as the bacterial loading from decaying animal matter plummeted. Native plants began to re-establish themselves in areas where carcasses had once poisoned the soil. The ancient, broken clockwork of the ecosystem was suddenly ticking properly again. Yet, it almost came crashing down. In the second winter of the release, an unexpected, severe outbreak of West Nile virus swept through the region, combined with a sudden spike in lead poisoning from an influx of local hunting. Within a single month, 6 of the released birds collapsed, their blood levels screaming with toxic lead. The field teams scrambled into action, launching an emergency trap-and-treat operation. They captured the sick birds, administering complex chelation therapy to strip the heavy metals from their systems, while simultaneously working on an experimental vaccine for the virus. It was an exhausting, round-the-clock battle fought in freezing temperatures on the edges of treacherous cliffs. The program survived by the razor-thin margin of a few dedicated heartbeats, but the momentum was building. Hope was no longer a fragile wish. It was growing into an undeniable reality. The hard data over the subsequent years tells a story of staggering, triumphant growth. From that terrifying rock-bottom number of just 22 birds in the mid-1980s, the population began to chart a remarkable, steady upward climb. By the year 2000, the population had crossed the 100 mark. By 2010, it had surged past 350. By the mid-2020s, the global population of California condors shattered all expectations, soaring past 550 individuals, with more than 300 of those living completely free in the wild. To put that into perspective, consider this scale anchor. The current wild population now roams over a combined territory that spans across California, Arizona, Utah, and Baja California, an area significantly larger than the entire state of New England, encompassing multiple national parks and rugged wilderness areas. Their status has officially transitioned from the absolute brink of extinction to a steadily stabilizing population. More importantly, humans are finally beginning to step back. The birds are taking over their own destiny. For the first time in nearly a century, biologists are documenting fully wild-born condors successfully raising their own wild-born chicks on the high ledges of the Grand Canyon and the redwood forests of Big Sur. The growth curve has completely transformed from a flat line into a soaring trajectory. This success has also generated massive economic and social benefits. Condor ecotourism has flooded local gateway communities with millions of dollars in revenue, creating jobs for local guides, park rangers, and hospitality workers. Local communities that once viewed the bird with suspicion now celebrate them as regional icons, prompting historic policy changes, including widespread bans on lead ammunition across multiple states to ensure the skies remain safe forever. But just as scientists were preparing to celebrate this textbook conservation victory, something happened that absolutely nobody expected. It was a phenomenon so strange, so biologically unprecedented, that it completely reframed the entire history of the species. To find the first clue, you have to look back at the detailed nesting logs kept by field biologists in the early years of the reintroduction. Every now and then, a researcher would note a strange behavioral anomaly. Certain female condors, despite being paired with healthy, fertile males, were tending to eggs that had been laid without any mating activity ever being observed. At the time, scientists dismissed these notes, assuming they had simply missed the nocturnal or secretive mating behaviors of the birds. They assumed it was impossible. It had never been recorded in the entire history of California condor research. Then came the scientific shockwave. Geneticists conducting routine DNA profiling on the wild population to monitor genetic diversity noticed something that made them question their own equipment. They ran the tests again, and then a third time. The results were undeniable. They found 2 independent instances of wild female condors producing chicks that were 100% genetically identical to their mothers. The chicks carried absolutely zero DNA from any male. This was not a mistake. It was facultative parthenogenesis, asexual reproduction, or what is commonly known as a virgin birth. While this phenomenon had been observed occasionally in certain species of insects, sharks, and reptiles, it was virtually unheard of in large, wild, socially complex birds, especially those living in environments where plenty of fertile males were readily available. The scientific community was left in absolute shock. Researchers deduced that the condor's genetic code possessed a hidden, ancient survival mechanism, a biological failsafe that could trigger the creation of life entirely on its own when a species faces extreme population stress. What we thought was a fragile, human-sustained species was actually harboring an ancient, secret power to rescue itself from the dark void of extinction. The official confirmation of this mind-blowing discovery was published in the prestigious Journal of Heredity in late 2021, sending shockwaves through the global scientific establishment. The study proved that the condor was not an evolutionary dead end, but a creature possessed of a profound adaptive genetic resilience that human science had completely underestimated. Yet, as incredible as the rigorous science is, the deepest emotional peak of this story lies far away from the laboratory benches, rooted deeply in human culture and memory. To the Yurok tribe of Northern California, the condor is known as prelegonish. In their ancient cultural memory, the condor is not just a bird, it is a sacred messenger, a holy being that carries the prayers of the people up to the Creator, because it is the only creature large enough and strong enough to fly high enough to reach the heavens. When the condor vanished from the skies 70 years ago, the Yurok felt a devastating spiritual void. Their elders wept because a vital, living bridge to their ancestors had been broken. For 7 decades, they kept the memory alive through stories, songs, and sacred dances, waiting for the day the messenger would return. In May of 2022, through a historic partnership with the US Fish and Wildlife Service, the Yurok tribe successfully released a new flock of condors into the skies over their ancestral lands in the Pacific Northwest. An elder stood on the grassy headlands, watching as a giant bird soared directly over the ancient redwood canopy. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered a welcome home to a spirit that had been gone for his entire lifetime. The sky was no longer silent. The bridge was restored. The prayers could finally be carried home once more. Look at how far we have come. From a terrifying, desperate low of just 22 individuals trapped in a captive breeding facility to over 550 magnificent giants reclaiming the great open thermal winds of the American West. Their status has transitioned from a tragic symbol of human destructiveness to a roaring, triumphant testament to what is possible when we refuse to give up on the wild. We didn't just save a bird from extinction. We returned the ancient king that knew exactly how to heal the land. This is the very core of the global rewilding movement, the profound understanding that nature does not need us to manage it. It simply needs us to return the missing pieces so it can heal itself. What wild creature in your part of the world do you wish could make a miraculous comeback like this? Let me know in the comments below, share this video with someone who needs a reason to hope today, and don't forget to hit subscribe to join us for more incredible stories of nature's greatest revivals. The horizon is wide, the skies are healing, and the ancient giants are finally home.